lends itself nicely to being able to get ahead of the market that's coming. So a lot of you guys are on teams, a lot of you guys, maybe on the buy side, maybe on the list side, you're absolutely impacted by a shifting market, whether you realize it or not, whether you're a solo agent or on a team or what have you. Being with KW absolutely helps, but we have the tools and resources for you to get ahead of it. What we're going to be talking about today is the purchase contract, which I like to look at the purchase contract as a chessboard. And we have to protect our clients. And if we know and understand all the pieces and how things can be moved around on this chessboard, it puts you in a better position to win in getting an offer accepted, but also not give everything away, right? Because you can write an offer today and get something accepted. You can waive all, by the way, this is happening on the mainland. You can waive all your contingencies, waive all your inspections, waive appraisal, all these other kind of things. And some agents will view that as, oh, I'm a great agent. I got this offer accepted. Well, are you though? I mean, maybe it depends on the goals and needs of the client. And if you had that conversation, you understand what their risk tolerances are and so forth, or the contract should be written in such a way to best protect them and also have a win. And no offense, I'm gonna throw Mike under the bus too, but sometimes if an attorney is the one that's drafting the contract, I'm not gonna get anything accepted because it's so heavily weighted to the other side in terms of being, too protective for the client. So any good negotiation is someplace in the middle. And what we like to discuss in strategies of a purchase contract is understanding what those nuances are, how to best prepare to win, but also be protective, different strategies and so forth. So thanks, Karen. I'll try not to break it again. KW we're the real estate company of choice for all the agents and the clients. This is a model, and I don't want to blow past this too much, but this is our value that is really, really important. There's a lot of agents that have come to us because of that. God, family, and then business in that order. A lot of brokerages are literally the opposite order. And it's not a religious statement by any stretch. It's what's important to you. And for us, it's the agents and their families first. These are our belief system, which you guys have seen probably all on the wall. And that's important for you guys to know. And we are obviously a tech company. Here's a bunch of new agents that have joined our company, and we're super, super happy to have them. If you see them around, please welcome them. These are our top producers for last month. I love seeing this list continually grow. This is amazing. You guys are doing really well. What's new in the Market Center before we get into the purchase contract class is our Copley office. Many of you guys know. We have been in that. This is kind of fun news, right? We have been in that space for 6 months, maybe 7 months or something like that, right? Not long.
Less than a year.
Less than a year, and we've already outgrown that space, which is a good problem to have. So Tony has helped us locate another office that's about twice the size. And we haven't even opened our doors yet, and we already have every single space rented out for that. So Tony, can you find us one that's like 5 times the size now?
Yeah, a little bit closer too.
Yeah, it literally is across the parking lot. So that one should be done sometime in July.
June. This month it's done.
Well,
we're moving in whether it's done or not.
Okay,
it's done the end of this month, right?
It's going to be a phenomenal space. We intend on doing some other things out of there too. Like I'll teach classes out of there as well. But just know that as agents with KW, you guys have access to all of our offices. We have 3 offices on island, Kailua, here, the Market Center, and then the Kapolei office. So if you guys need to meet clients, use the conference room, whatever it is that you need, feel free to drop in. And if you don't have access, every office we have has a keypad. So if it's after hours or whatever it is, just let us know. We'll get you access to it. We're planning a 4th of July beach party. And I think Rustin promises to wear a Speedo, right? That was the promise. From Tony? Does that, are you suggesting
no, not me.
Speedo?
No, not
because
me.
That's not.
Right, tong for tong.
It's the greatest thing I've ever seen.
What?
So
That's it.
we're planning a 4th of July, not on the 4th, because I think the 4th falls on a Monday, but we're planning it, Rustin, what was like a Friday or something like that before? July 1st. Yeah, so we'd love for you guys to join. It's in the works, but community and culture is important to KW. We want to make sure we have fun, hang out, enjoy the company of each other. And it's a family thing too, so bring your family. Bold is back. If you guys aren't familiar with what Bold is an unbelievable class, and one that can, statistically speaking, one that has been proven to launch you into production. So whether, again, you're an independent agent, whether you're on a team, whether you're on the buy side, list side, in fact, there are some that come from outside industries like escrow or title or mortgage that take Bold because it's so good in getting people in production. Russ, how many times have you taken Bold?
12 times.
How many?
12.
Oh, wow. And what do you think of Bold?
I think it's the best sales class in the entire country.
Is it the same every single time? Like if someone says, I've already taken Bold, I don't need to take Bold again.
It's not, because the individual is always changing and growing, and the material is also, even though it has principal foundations that exist, it's also growing. So it's pertinent to the times that we're currently.
One of the things that Gary says too is all the new information, the new data, the new strategies, the new scripts that he releases through Bold. So it kind of forces people to want to take Bold again because you're getting all the new information. So Bold is not the same thing every single time that you take it. It's coming back. It's going to be live in person. Through the pandemic, we've had Bold on Facebook, which was okay. We had Bold on Zoom, which was maybe a step above that, maybe. Bold in person is a different thing altogether. It's like an energy thing, right? Like when you guys go to a concert, going to a concert or watching a concert, a video of a concert, two entirely different things. That's certainly the case with Bold. And I called Bold, which is through KWRI. I called Bold and I asked them to send the best coaches, and they are. They're sending the director of Bold and all the top Bold coaches here. They're literally flying in just to teach you guys in person. So that's going to be on Thursday. The first step to Bold, if you guys haven't, if you're still like, I'm not sure, whatever it is, first step is free. So if nothing else, if you do nothing else at all, just come to the first step on a Bold on Thursday. It's at 9:30. I think it ends at 2, right? Is that right? And we did that on purpose so that people can beat traffic getting here. They still have the rest of their day. The previous iterations of Bold was, I'm not even kidding you, was 8 to 5. And while it was great, it was exhausting. It was super exhausting. But this one is cut a little bit short. It's a little bit more condensed for that reason. So I encourage you guys to participate if you can. What happened here? Russ. This is a question for you guys. Russ had better know the answer to it. What 2 actions must real estate agents take ownership of? And this comes from the shift. Shar. She leaves. You're not here yet, sorry. Anyone? There's a cash prize, and that cash prize is Russ is going to give someone, he's going to gift someone his BMW.
For a day.
For a day. How should I pay?
I was selling that day.
It's lead generation and lead conversion. And it goes down back, when in any market, but certainly the shift, you have to, that's not the time to be creative. It's a time to focus on your one thing and get real good at that. And the lead generation portion and lead conversion part of it is super important. We are going to start teaching the shift.
Right there. The second one,
It's lead generation and lead conversion.
the bags.
Oh,
That's all there is, I think.
Someone.
yeah. Jewel, can you mute everyone else?
Yes, Jed.
Thank you. So we're going to start teaching shift in the market center here. And we're going to have unbelievable instructors teach. And some of these instructors you might know, it's Rustin Tong. It's Anthony Leonard Pace. It sounds very formal when I say it like that. Anthony Leonard Pace, or is it Pache? Is that how you-
Pache.
Anthony Leonard Pache? It's going to be the Lallies, Adrian Antilio, Julie Hara, Danny Hara. I'll teach the first and the last one. So there's some really good instructors teaching the shift, and the shift is like I mentioned before. It's a great source of material in any market, but certainly I promise you guys, the market is absolutely changing. Does anyone feel the market changing yet? Every day.
Yeah.
how do you guys see who those who are active in the market right now? How do you feel that? Like, how are you gauging that?
Quality of buyers is it's diminishing.
Okay.
Because the interest rates are going up.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that you pre-qual very well and have those direct conversations with buyers.
So in showings, no multiple offers, it's maybe one or two. And appraisal, a lot of our appraisals are coming in lower.
So for those at home,
My side.
for those on Zoom, it may not hear is the quality of buyers because of interest rates rising. The appraisals are coming in a little bit lower. It's slower to show.
Price reductions on a
Fewer
daily basis.
escalations and appraisal gap clauses.
Yeah, by the way, we'll talk about some of this too, but the tools that we use when we write an offer to get an offer accepted change depending on the market that we're in. Like a few years ago, an appraisal clause versus an escalation clause carried a different type of weight. You wouldn't use both. You would use one or the other depending on the market that you're in. And so these types of clauses and techniques and strategies will change depending on the market that we're heading into. I was teaching a class for someone else, and I was looking at some of my old material, and I had looked at a slide deck that I had put together about 4 years ago. And it astonished me because I was giving some stats about the real estate market at that time. And on my slide deck, it said, basically, oh my gosh, guys, can you believe that right now, nationwide, we have 900 and something licensed real estate agents? At that time, we hadn't hit 1 million yet, and that was a big deal. Do you guys know how many licensed agents there are now nationwide? So this is just a few years ago.
NAR or KW?
NAR,
1.4.
about 1.65, something like that. And so the market's changed substantially. A lot of people have jumped in, and they've jumped in because it seems fun, it seems easy,
Sexy.
it seems sexy. Well, seems sexy.
That's what I'm hearing.
Not everyone's mirror says the same thing.
Not everyone's mirrors, it's the same thing.
Some people are just going.
Some are a little more honest than others.
I think mine is the funhouse mirror. The one that's like a little like one of those. But here's the thing. The thing is that in every shifting market, like just like how it was in I forgot the actual numbers, but from 2009, you guys remember the mortgage meltdown? We lost about 35% of real estate agents nationally. They all jumped out. They couldn't hang. They could, because the market is shifting. So I promise you guys, the things that you're doing right now to be successful in real estate and to gain business are not the same exact things that you're going to be doing tomorrow. Because what you're doing right now is based upon the activities that the market dictates right now. As everything changes, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to pivot. And I'm saying this for Maria too, but the sky is not falling. She hates when I sound, doom and gloom, and it's not doom and gloom. We have all the tools and resources for people to survive. In fact, KW grows. Historically, KW has grown every single shifting market. So congratulations, you guys are all in the right place. However, there's going to be a little bit of fallout, and that's up to you. You have to reach out and grab the tools and choose to use them and apply them. Right, Tony?
Yes,
Pache?
yes.
Some
You
tech
just call me
updates.
Pache. You don't have to go Tony, Anthony, Leonard, whatever.
Just Pache?
Yeah.
I like it. So KW update, there's now an import wizard. Carrie, much to talk about any of this? You want to touch on this or pretty self-explanatory stuff?
It's self-explanatory. You know what? If you have a virtual assistant, utilize that. It's a pain in the butt, right? You're mapping every cell field to everything in command. Have somebody do that for you. We have great virtual assistants here at the market center that can help as well. But it's a really quick tool. Once you map it yourself, if you want it, you just hit submit and it goes right into command.
And a little tip too is that we do have a concierge program. We haven't fully released it yet. So for those of you who are watching or on Zoom or here, our concierge service, those of you who are on a team, I have that covered, but we have services that help write contracts for you, that help prepare listing documents for you, that you can also use to do database management. So all these different things can make it a little bit easier. For new agents, it's not applicable to new agents that are in the coaching program. We want you to learn how to write a contract and understand what it is. And then that becomes a leverage point that you can use. You don't want to skip that process of actually learning. Designs for teams. Anything to touch on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, if you guys are utilizing designs at the team level, once you have that, you can set a standard that you'd like to have, and all of your team members will have access to those same templates, and it trickles down, right? Same thing like tags. So really cool stuff for teams coming up.
So they don't have to redesign it. The team template's already
Your team
there.
leader, Rainmaker generates one template, or your marketing person is one template at the Rainmaker level, and then it'll just trickle down.
Here's the great thing about Command is, when Command first came out, everyone was kind of like, yeah, but Boomtown is better, or Follow Up Boss is better, or whatever it is. Trust me when I say that, as new as Command is, it has grown leaps and bounds ahead of all the competition. And at some point, a lot of the teams are like, you know what? All right, I tap. I'm moving over because it's included, it's free, and KW cares. We actually listen to the feedback of the agents, the mega agents, the admin, the VAs, of all the things that if you did this would make it so much better and more functional, and we add it. So all these different things that you see on updates that happen on a monthly basis are as a result of everyone saying, hey, can you add this feature? Can you add this button? Can you add this report, or whatever it is? So it's going to be phenomenal. National Home Ownership Month is coming up, and all those things, these are classes that have become available on KW Connect. This is a new book that KW is putting out. It's a fun book that if you as an agent or you as a team, I think I sent this to you, Maria. Maria does first-time homebuyer seminars, and she invites her sphere, and she also uses to grow her downline as well. So there's people that show up. I sent it to her because this book just came out. That's a fun giveaway, whether you give it to every attendee or whether you just kind of do a raffle or whatever it is. Your first home book that's written by KW that still is within that theme and that ecosystem of our model. So that comes out. Outfront Magazine is available, all the social content on the calendar, all these designs that are now available. Keller Mortgage is available. By the way, I know some of you guys partner with certain loan officers, which is fantastic. We're building out new programs to help you guys as well. But one thing, and we don't get anything for it, but one mention that I want to say about Keller Mortgage is, in a market like we're in right now, where it's shifting, you have to know the value propositions of all the partners. And one of the things that the shift says is to reevaluate and cut your expenses. Likewise, you should be reevaluating your affiliations and your partnerships as well, because there's different value propositions that come up. And one of the things that Keller Mortgage has that's very unique is they don't charge any closing costs. That's number one. Number two is one or both sides have to be part of KW. So there's a little bit of that exclusiveness. And also they credit back $1,000 towards closing costs. They're priced extremely well, and they don't charge for an appraisal unless it closes. So that's a huge one. And it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense 6 months ago or a year ago. Like, that's not a big deal, but it's a big deal when the market's starting to shift. And it's a big deal when appraisals aren't coming in, and maybe you're writing an offer and this appraisal didn't come in. Well, guess what? They don't have to put a credit card up front. They're not paying for it up front. If it doesn't close as a result of that appraised value not coming in and you cancel and you go to the next one, the homeowner didn't even spend anything at all. The only thing that they spent would have been the cost of the home inspection. So we don't get anything for it, but just, again, know your lenders and what their value proposition is. It's a tool that you want to be able to utilize. Mega Camp's coming up August 23rd, 24th. I know some of it is virtual. A lot of people are going to go in person. I'm going to go in person. Are you going to go?
No,
I have room in my suitcase.
I'm going virtual.
Are you going?
I'm going in your suitcase.
I'm going to get I need big suitcases. All right, Tongs, are you guys going? Of course you guys are going. Yeah. So Maria's going, right? So I hope you guys are going to go. It is actually really, really good. Not that I hope that this happens by any stretch, but my first mega camp was actually Mega Relief. Do you guys remember that? So Mega Relief was when Hurricane Harvey hit the Gulf Coast, and they pivoted and changed Mega Camp to Mega Relief, where we gave back and helped give our time and help rebuild homes and demug homes and all these other kind of things. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was like life-changing for me. And yet we still learned. We learned on the buses, the bus rides to the disaster sites and so forth. There's a MAPS models course that's coming up with KW. It's both in person and online. Okay, I'm going to get to the fun stuff. Hey guys, look at this. Our Red Day photos are back. If you guys ever want to market some of your Rust and Don't, whatever you're thinking, just don't even say it.
How do you know?
Because you got 15 different faces that are all happening at the same time. So we have videos that are out. If you guys want them to use for your own downline to put out there, feel free to do them. We'll send them out to everyone.
We should get those registered up.
Do you guys know what the TCPA is? Have you guys heard of that? For those who are doing what you're supposed to be doing in lead gen. TCPA is the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. It's super, super important. Fortunately, we don't have that issue as widely here, but it absolutely is a thing on the mainland. And companies, brokerages, KWs, other brokerages are being sued because people are calling those that are on the do not call list. Really, really important. And what they're doing is they're making it it's not the issue of just like one incident. They're making it a class action, which is a really, really big problem. So you have to check their do not call list. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but KW, and we have, and I mean, I don't know for how many years straight, but we pull the Hawaii do not call list together, and it's put on the intranet once a month. So if you guys use auto dialers, or if you guys are getting leads online, please have someone scrub your lead to the do not call list. Let's make sure that's happening. And by the faces out there, that's probably not happening, but please make,
Going back when there was a question in the chat about the red day pictures, how did they get them? Where did they go?
Can you go back to the red day picture? There it is, unread.
If they're not in the photos, they can't get copies of them, right?
we can send them out. So just have them email you. And then you can send them the photos, you can send we have produced videos, and you can use them to put on your Facebook or
Will you
whatever.
be signing any of the photos of you with your
Okay,
big guns?
I'm gonna move on.
You guys sign that bottom right.
Okay, so what's today's goal? We're gonna talk about purchase contract, some of the changes, the strategies. Please take notes. We're gonna go through some of, and by the way, I don't know if you guys saw some of my videos before, but I try to make it so easy for everyone. I created in Zip Forms a template, and all you got to do when you go into Zip Forms and you're creating a new transaction, you just click on templates, and then it opens up a series of different options when you're creating that brand new, whatever it is, that transaction. And I assign them to say, is it designated agency? Is it conventional? Is it VA? Is it a listing or whatever? I've categorized it and made it super easy. And the benefit for you to do that is you're not starting with a blank canvas, because here's the thing with agents is if I said, we had a couple of brokers in the past, they'll remain nameless, but they were big on just start with a blank purchase contract. And by the way, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I love it. Start with a blank because you're building it from scratch and you're customizing it to the goals, needs, and priorities of your client. But you know what agents do? They'll copy the one that they just wrote for Mr. Smith. And they copy it over to this guy, and it's a different guy, and it's not even VA, it's now conventional, and it's not the same down payment. And all the things that you may have put in there for this guy is now transferred. That's not protecting the client. That's what agents do, right? Even though you guys probably won't admit it, that's what happens. So I've made the template so that you don't have to do that. Do you use a template? Does anyone use the templates that I created? You do. How much of it is already complete, roughly?
80%.
Yeah, it's like 80% in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to put like the TMK, the addresses, obviously the finance breakdown and structure, but everything else is in there, including the addenda that is required. So if it's a VA, I categorize it as VA. The VA addendum's in there. The short-term rental is in there. Yeah, Russ.
If you do the MLS upload and you suck in the MLS information,
Yeah.
then it should
Yeah,
fill out the rest.
right. And so, and if you did that, now you're at like 90 to 95% complete. The things that you still need to put in there is like the financing and, you got to look in there. Like you don't want to be the agent that just click, click, click and spit out a contract because it's so important. You got to look at it. You got to look at it and understand it. But if we've made it so easy for you, especially with all the changes, and we'll talk about some of those, what some of those changes are. Maybe we'll talk about it. If this slide ever changes, we'll talk about it. There we go. So the purchase contract, make sure that you guys are using the right version. The most recent version, you guys are pretty good about that now. For a while, a lot of people are still using the old version, but by the way, that's also an indicator to a broker when we're looking at it that you're copying from an old file. But the new version is May of 2022. So make sure you're using the new version. I just have this on here just so you know, there's subtle changes that were made in the latest version, most of which was coming from designated agency. And we're going to talk about that. Do I have another slide on there? Hold on. That's another change on there, and on another page for designated agency being added on there, which we have our own policy on, and the rest of it is rather benign. Okay, so let me back up for 1 second. If you guys look on page 1 of the purchase contract, there's this thing called designated agency. I know we had a class about it, but I still see it come through where people are a little bit confused. So there is something traditionally where an agent represents the buyer or they represent a seller, right? They're cooperating with another brokerage, another licensee. That's kind of typical. If that agent represents both the buyer and the seller, or the brokerage represents both the buyer and the seller, that is a very typical and common way in what we would call dual agency, right? That's always been the case in the past. Well, they recently created a new type of agency. It's been, on the mainland, but they kind of brought it over to Hawaii just a couple of months ago. It's called designated agency, and I like it in concept. I don't think they rolled it out the right way, which is why we have our own policies of doing this. But what designated agency is and what it allows for is, did you guys know that under dual agency, so let's say that Maria and I are in a transaction together, I represent the seller and she represents the buyer. Under dual agency, I can't help, my client negotiate a price. She can't suggest a price to her client when she's writing a contract, because the seller is her client, even though she's never even met the seller. And the buyer is my client, even though I don't even know who the buyer is. That's the restriction. Dual agency is very, very restricted. And dual agency is also one of the easiest ways that you can get sued. It's super, super restrictive. So the designated agency allows you to kind of put up a theoretical wall so that both agents, even though they're under the same brokerage firm, can represent the buyer and the seller exclusively. Really, it's the broker or the PB that's the dual agent, but the licensees are designated agents. So it does allow you to have the dialogue that you would normally have. Here's what I suggest, here's based on the comps, and you can have that level of conversation and negotiation and consult with your clients, whereas with dual agency, that's restricted. You can't do that. So I want you guys to know that. I'm explaining that because it's such a huge advantage to you as agents. It kind of restores your power, if you will, a little bit. But when they made these changes, what they didn't do, in our opinion, is you see how A2A, B is basically buyer and seller if it's different firms. C is dual agency. What they should have done is D made it a designated agency field. And then E, creating that other one, moving the customer down. By the way, you guys know client and customer, what the differences are. Client, we owe fiduciary responsibility to, whereas a customer, we owe professionalism, honesty, and so forth, but not fiduciary responsibility, right? And that would be like, the most common example of that would be like a FSBO. But being that A2C is dual agency, what a lot of people are doing with designated agency is they're just checking that and kind of assuming that it's designated, and they're putting in the designated form on D1, the addenda. That's really not the right way to do it, based on the restrictions of the contract. So KW's standard is, if you have a designated agency, which, by the way, I'm telling you, it's about 95% of the time, it's going to be designated versus dual. No, you don't think? Oh, I know why. So it'll still be designated. So what you're going to do is, if it is a designated agency, meaning again, both the buyer and seller are with the brokerage, but there's two different licensees involved in the transaction. A2A and B are going to be NA. A2C is going to be checked. And in the description, you're going to put Keller Williams Honolulu by way of designated agency. By the way, I created a template that automatically completes it for you.
And I think the reason why they did it this way
Yeah.
is because, when the forms committee do forms, they don't look at the big brokerages because they know that the big brokerages will come out with their own addenda. It's really for the majority of companies that don't have as many agents. And so that's the reason why they didn't put, designated agency on the contract the way that it should have been.
Yeah, and that's okay, because whenever there's a change, usually what happens is we all get together, we go to legal if need be. We kind of brainstorm this thing to ensure that the policies match up to what the intention is, because sometimes, as you guys know, they can make a change to something and it's with good intent, but the process of rolling it out is bad or clumsy. So we've come up with this thing to make sure that it doesn't fall on its face. So on D1, which is the addenda, you'll notice in there in red, because that's the annotated copy of that, is they've added designated agency to that. So if it's a same example I gave before, if it's a designated agency, you're gonna check the designated agency. That's the form that's already created by HBR. However, their form isn't complete. It's not. It doesn't kind of tie it all together. We've created another form, an in-house KW form, which basically addresses the fact that we called it Keller Williams Honolulu by way of designated agency in the dual agency column above, because we're kind of using something that's not used, it's not meant to be used like that. So we need a document to state that the purchase contract is amended to adjust for that change that we created, because theirs is a little bit clumsy. So you're going to check the designated agency there, but you're also going to check other and add in there Keller Williams or KW designated agency addendum. Is it addendum or notice?
I think we're still in some debate about that.
But
There should
whatever,
be disclosure.
or it's a disclosure, whatever. But it's already there. It's already existing. It's already available. We sent it out to you.
So it's gonna be two extra, not extra.
If you're doing a designated agency, there's two forms to be added to it. It's not redundant. It's the HBR version and it's the KW version.
The reason it's not redundant, even though it seemingly is because the KW version will have a spot for the client to actually check designated agency, where on the D1 addendum, it doesn't have that space. So it's just an extra step to prove that we had that discussion with the client and they had informed consent on selecting that agency.
If you guys go back to like your pre-licensing classes and what have you, the agency conversation, especially if it's a dual agency or in this case designated, is super important. Like you have to discuss what the limitations are, if any, of service that you're providing to them. So that what he's referring to is making sure that it's acknowledged and signed and everything else, that we've had that kind of conversation. So we're not sued later.
I have a question. How's it going to work for the solo agent or the teams? Where someone's name goes on all the contracts, right?
Yeah. So the solo agent is going to be a dual agent. So remember I said like 90-95% of the time it's going to be designated. If Christine has a seller and she also represents the buyer, that is not designated agency. That's a normal, traditional dual agency. So what I just said right now is just going to check A2C. It's just going to say Keller Williams. It's not going to have designated agency. Instead, it'll have dual agency. That's it. If it's a team, the PB is allowed, and it depends on how the team is set up, but the PB is allowed to designate the agent. That's why it's called designated agency. So like if it's a Tong team, the way that they're set up is all the listings are in Char's name. And let's say that Jordan is the buyer's agent. That's a designated agency. There's two different licensees. That's a pretty easy distinction.
In that format though, when the transaction records, is it still placed under the rainmaker's name?
Correct.
Yeah, it's still under the rainmaker's name. But that part of it is up to the PB to designate who the licensee would be. But I don't want to play games with that kind of stuff. I know that system and you guys have it just exactly like that, but it's not a system that should be like, well, just say it's designated. It's like if it's dual, then just do it as dual. If it's designated, then we'll use it as such.
Correct.
It's a great question, Pache.
I may not say much, but when I do.
So when you guys are preparing an offer, some of the questions that I have over here is call a listing agent. This is something that Shar preaches all the time. And some of these questions, I think, Shar, I might have stolen from you years ago to give you credit for that, is when you call another agent, when you're making, this is especially helpful in a shifting market. I mean, I was taking a class with KW, and one of the things that they said, which I thought was brilliant, is agents are very salesy when it comes to their clients, but they turn off that salesmanship, which is really the service level, when they're dealing with other agents. Like you got to sell yourself to the other agent as to why they should do business with you, why they should push for your offer to be accepted, right? And sometimes you'll get more information out of what the motivation is of the seller and so forth. So when you call a listing agent, some of the things that you should be asking them is, do you have any offers in hand? I don't know why people don't even ask that question. If so, how strong are those offers? And guess what? Ask the question and shut up. Because more often than not, in my experiences, you get all the answers that you probably shouldn't be getting, but you get them. You didn't ask them, but you're getting it. Like for instance, so how strong are those offers? Listen, I got this one offer, it's for 472,500. So if you bring in an offer like $1,000 more than that, I'm sure I'm like, wow, okay. And I'm just writing down the information. I didn't ask them, but they're just saying that, right? When are you presenting offers to the seller? Yeah.
Just a little aside onto that, you can ask how much the offers are. As long as the seller authorizes the listing agent to disclose that to the buyer's agent, you can.
And that has to be in the listing agreement, though.
Or it could just be subsequent permission, as long as it's authorized on this case, you can ask. You can always ask. You might not get the answer, but you can always ask.
You know, when you get into the how strong are the offers too, for me personally, the things that I care about as well is some people can say, oh yeah, I got 4 offers, and I'll go like, is it finance, huge down payment? Like I'm just trying to, those are the things that I want to know so I can set up my strategy about how I'm going to be writing an offer. Russ, you have thoughts?
Oh, I think that's really, you start general and then get specific. Strong is an open-ended question, and then from there, bring up more information, you have financing, cash.
Yeah.
What terms are appealing to your seller?
Because here's the thing too, right? Is sometimes people, what is considered strong is completely subjective. Because the goals and priorities of a seller might be get me the highest offer. So if you call and you say, how strong are the offers? Oh, I got 2 cash offers. Okay, but cash offers, as we know, aren't always above asking. Sometimes they're 5% short or 10% short or whatever that is. So it would still be beneficial to have a follow-up question to find out how strong they are. When are you presenting? Yes.
One of my favorite questions to ask the listing agents is, what would I word it? What would we be able to do on our end to make our offer the strongest? Or like what would put us in the leading position compared to the other offers that you have in hand right now? That way it kind of like opens it up and it lets them talk about the other offers and share exactly what they want to share.
Here's how I would word that, because this is the question that I ask all the time is, besides price, what's most important to the seller? And here's the interesting thing about that question is I always get an answer. Sometimes the answer is, we just want the highest price. Okay, then I'm just competing. Like that's just what it is. But you'll be surprised at how many times I've gotten an answer of, you know what, the sellers are military and they need to have a post occupancy for X amount of time. Thank you for asking. No one's ever been asked that question before. Or, you know, it'd be helpful if you could include a credit for this, or they're real tight on proceeds if you could offset the cost by this. And now, assuming that it's okay with my buyer, I'm structuring the contract, to your point, Amanda, I'm structuring the contract to the needs of the seller. And I'm putting myself in a better position to win. So aside from price, what's most important to the seller? I say that, I have that question, that's number 3. The reason why I ask that besides price is it's too easy to get it. Yeah, just give me the highest. Of course, that's the highest. Everyone wants the most money, but besides that, what other things are important? When you're presenting offers is really important. Are there any pertinent items to disclose? Always take a look. The whole, kind of joke about agents don't read. I hate to say that's totally true. On the MLS in the instructions, it'll oftentimes say, like, do this and this, and don't email this, or don't call this number. Instead, call this person and look at the supplements page, or whatever it is. Just take the time to look at it, because what you might be calling for, especially in a competitive situation, might already be answered in the remarks, or it might be already in supplements. Yeah, sure.
So one thing that we would recommend adding to that is that's all seller-based questions, and we are relying on the listing agent to perform and present our offers accordingly. So it's also important to ask the listing agent, other than what's important to your client, what is important to you,
Ooh, that's a great one.
Seller, listing agent, in working with a buyer's agent. what are those key factors that would also help in, being partnership with you. So one, you'll get their personality. One, you'll see what's important to them, because ultimately this is also a relationship, right, environment, and the relationship with co-agents are really important as well. So that's one thing to ask. Second that we started asking is that everybody has a deadline of offers. Sometimes they disclose it on MLS, sometimes they don't. And so if there is a deadline in the MLS, what we started asking is, we see that the deadline is such and such. If there was a strong offer that was to come in, presented to your client, do you think that they would consider accepting that?
Those are
It kind of,
great.
you listen to that. We've had an agent say, yeah, submit it.
Yeah.
But really the deadline is such and such, but submit it.
Yeah.
Deadline is that until they get something like.
Exactly. And then so you just cut in line.
Where you create opportunity.
I think that goes to the point that we were talking about before, which is being of good service to to the other agent, and being that requires being a salesperson to the other agent too, by asking them what's important to you. That's a great one. I love that one. That's a great aha. You guys should be writing that down.
I would just add, this is probably the most critical time for us to add value to our clients, because of all the information that can be gleaned by just asking the questions, and like you said, just shutting up. Letting that empty space of a few seconds pass, the other side will just volunteer information to you. If we're not doing this, this is kind of our play sheet. This is kind of like a football coach going into a game without a call sheet and just kind of going off of the cuff without any organization or game plan. This is our game plan. This is our call sheet. And this lets us know how the transaction is going to go. And to Shar's point, it also maybe builds a little bit of respect and professionalism, because if a buyer's agent is asking these questions, that means they obviously care, that they're attentive, and I would respect an opposing agent if they were asking me these questions and they were insightful and detailed questions. They were prepared. That would go a long way in knowing how the transaction is likely going to go. So all these things add tremendous value.
So thank you for that insight. So another thing too is, let's say that you ask the question, what's important to the seller, and they say stuff, because this is a real thing that happens is, you know what, we've already done the survey from a previous, couple years ago, we have this and we have that. Does that mean that now that you know that information, you just should go, okay, the buyer's just gonna accept it? That's really not the answer. The answer is you're gathering all this information so you can have a follow-up conversation with your buyer to know what their risk tolerance is. Hey, just FYI, they have one of the requirements that they wanted was they have a survey that was 3 years old. They want you to accept that survey. Well, what does that mean? What is that? Those risks? Don't worry, we have some language specifically for that can shore that up a little bit, or they want us to waive this contingency, or whatever the case. It doesn't mean you do it. It just means that's what they're asking. But you still have to have the conversation and the consultation with the buyer to make sure that that's okay with them. Pache? No. Okay.
So good.
A2, if delay, yeah, we talked about this, I suppose. Earnest money deposits. It's part of the negotiation. A lot of agents will ask, especially new agents will go, well, how much should I put for earnest money? Well, it depends. It depends on so many factors. It depends on what the overall purchase price is, but it also depends on what kind of financing that they have. But one thing to know is, I see a lot of agents get overzealous and they'll put all, if not a big bulk of it, into the initial deposit. You can break it up, and you probably should, especially if it's a larger amount. One of the things that Chemo Stone, who wasn't able to teach last week with us, but we'll bring him back, is he'll always say, when something goes into escrow, don't think that that's going to be automatically guaranteed to be returned back to the buyer. Not necessarily. If they're writing a check to escrow, they have to be prepared to part ways with that money for a variety of reasons. So to protect them, you should be potentially breaking that up. Again, it depends on the negotiation and so forth. But instead of the example I gave is instead of putting 10,000 as initial, maybe put 2,500, 7,500 as follow-up. The follow-up or secondary deposit comes typically, the way I always gotta go about it is 2 days after J1 satisfaction, not J1 acceptance, not J1. I've seen 2 days after J1. J1 what? What does that mean? So the way we've written it for you in the template is 2 business days after J1 satisfaction. or you can split it up 5,000, 5,000. So why, if the contract says that a buyer can cancel for a variety of reasons, I think they have like 7 or 8 ways to cancel. Why then, if they cancel within a contingency, why would their earnest money be jeopardized? Anyone, I mean, throw out an answer. Why would their earnest money be jeopardized if in fact the contract says that they can cancel within a certain time frame?
Because it requires that the money is with a neutral third party, requires 2 parties to release.
So what Rustin said was, for those at home, is in our contracts, it's bilateral, right? So you have to have both principals, buyer and seller, agree to what happens with the funds. It doesn't automatically go back to one person or another, and it's not dictated. By the way, in some states, it is. California is one that the escrow officer decides where it's going to go. And while that's great when you're the party that they have favored, man, that's super frustrating when you're not. And so in our state here in Hawaii, escrow officers do not make that decision. So even though the contract says, hey, Char, you can cancel during J1, and Char sees the property. And by the way, it doesn't have to, they can cancel because there's a mark on the white wall, or that the roof is caving in. It doesn't matter. But for whatever it is, they cancel within their time frame that they're allowed to within the contingency of J1, and she terminates, and I'm the seller. I can go, nah, I don't agree. I could be a jerk about it and not allow her earnest money back, and then it just gets stuck. And then there's a dispute. I've had that happen twice, and it doesn't happen often. I've had it happen twice in 22 years. Have you ever had that happen before?
No. But
So-
sometimes you can put it in Q1. You can just say, in the event that buyers cancel, seller releases their money within 5 days.
But I will say that is up to yes, that works about 50%, 60% of the time. It's still up to the escrow officer whether they're going to act on that instruction that's in Q1. Because technically the contract already states that. You're just kind of reinforcing that. Like,
Well, to your guys' point, the smaller the amount, the less of a chance that they're gonna try to fight for it. In my 22 years, I've had a few times that it got fought for as well. And it was a bigger amount, $50,000 or $100,000 deposit. They're gonna want to put their things out a little bit more. So I'm always really reluctant to, especially on an initial or even after a J1, put down that large of a figure for that reason. Because maybe before closing, I just don't really see a big benefit to putting down a huge amount, even if it's a cash sale up front, because then it can be hard to get it back. And the more that it's out there, the more incentivized the seller is to fight for it or to absorb legal costs to fight for it.
and so if there's an amount, I'll give you an example. If it's like $10,000 or less, what happens? Just in case anyone's curious, what happens if both buyer and seller can't agree as to what that amount is or who gets it or whatever it is? If they can't settle it, they can't come to an agreement, it goes into something called interpleader. And interpleader is a process by which they have to get a court involved. The escrow has to get a court involved to determine who gets the funds. But interpleader costs money that pays for itself out of the money that's in escrow. So if there's an amount, I'm told that interpleader can cost anywhere from $5-6 grand. It kind of depends on who it is. But imagine there's $5 or $6 grand that's in there. They're gonna, nothing happens because by the time they figure out who gets the money, they get what's left after they paid themselves. So just know that's called interpleader. It hardly happens, and interpleader kicks in when there's a stalemate for a certain amount of time. It's different per escrow company. In a situation that I was in, we were at a stalemate for about 11 months, and they still didn't kick in. And interpleader didn't kick in. We ended up settling it, fortunately. So every escrow company is a little bit different. Okay. C1 is your expiration. Just make sure that you have it already states it in the contract. Everything's based on Hawaii Standard Time, but I like to be ultra clear, and I put that in there. So if it's 5 o'clock, I'll put 5 o'clock p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. And the reason we do that is because in Hawaii specifically, there's so much transplants. We're dealing with military that may be off island or whatever, or in Japan or what have you. And it's typical for the person that's receiving that information to think that the expiration is at their own time zone. So just adding clarity to it. C2, which is the breakdown of the purchase contract. When using additional deposits, use language like we talked about before, 2 business days after J1 satisfaction. Don't use things like, which I see all the time, 2 biz days or 2 days. And one of the main reasons why is, well, first of all, it's unprofessional, but if ever this ends up in a dispute to which goes in front of either an attorney and you're in a deposition, or it goes to court, you're going to be picked apart by another attorney for being unprofessional, and your whole case is going to fall apart based on stuff like that, because it's a reflection of who you are as a professional.
It's actually a code of ethics against that.
About using that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of not being ignorant of the practice.
So when you text me like, see you tomorrow, like that's not.
That's perfectly.
So
That's perfect.
stop sending
There's a
you
hug
emojis.
emoji.
D1, if something's not applicable, don't leave it blank. In fact, the PC, if you guys notice on it, it says on there, write NA if it's not applicable. A lot of agents will select with an X the things that are applicable and leave everything else blank. And why would you not want to leave that blank? Because someone who might have, nefarious thought process might insert an X and add something later or try to. So you want to cover yourself. Like anything that's on there that it doesn't apply, put an NA. It says it right on the contract. E2, if something not applicable there, don't leave it blank. Same thing. PC requires NA. E3, which is the inclusions section of the lease. So this is on PV, the last iteration or 2 iterations ago of the purchase contract, they separated out PV, whether it's owned or leased. And a lot of times people will use E3 as being leased only. And I would heavily disagree with that. It does mention lease on there if you guys look at it, but it also says other. So when you own a system, let's say someone has it, but they own it, but there's like a maintenance agreement, there's a warranty that's attached to it, there's other documentation. How many times have you guys represented a buyer and you're buying something that has an own PV system, and the buyer's like, hey, where's the paperwork? Do you have any paperwork on it? That's the paperwork. That's what you want to have that. And what you're doing is you're creating another layer of contingency, another protection for the buyer. So when I talk about like you're playing chess, you're adding all these layers of protection in different areas to protect the buyer. Could the seller get it and negotiate that out or counter that out? Of course, but you want to add as many things as you can. So if it is an owned system, not a lease system, you would still check E3, and then other, you could add things like maintenance agreement or ownership agreement or warranty plan or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be the lease documents. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification real quick. Sorry to keep bugging you. Under D1, if it's our listing, let's say, and we receive an offer, or we didn't write the offer, and they didn't mark other NA for all the other boxes, I've seen it a few different ways. And when I always encourage our team to address that, any unused other line is now NA. You can't say all are NA in the whole contract because you might be voiding terms if you
Correct.
want to.
Yeah.
But I think it's prudent, even on the offer we didn't write, to still address that. And I just brought it up because I just saw it recently, and I encourage our team to counter by making NA. So if we see those things, it is important to at least address it. And I didn't know if that was the best way to do it.
So well, the best way to do it is not do that for the person who's originating the purchase contract. But if you're countering back, whether it's internally or out, and you see that blank, you can counter by saying all blank items in D1 to be deemed NA. And to your point, just to touch on it, is some brokerages use language like in Q1, all blanks deemed NA. You don't want to do that for a variety of different reasons, because there are some areas that are supposed to be left blank, and it could be interpreted legally as you've made that entire section not applicable, not that it was supposed to be blank. So like that kind of stuff is a little tricky. So when you guys, I'm just saying that because if you guys see it, that's not appropriate, don't write it. And what he's referring to is if on D1, if there's things that are left blank, if you're receiving an offer and you're countering, you can counter back by saying the blank items in D1 are deemed NA, just for instance. Right, Pache?
Yeah, you could also do it for E2.
For what?
For E2.
Right, you can do it for E2. E4, if furnished, include an inventory list. It's pretty self-explanatory. F2, this is a change that we've made, gosh, I don't know, a year and a half ago now. And I see it mostly now, but there's some people that leave it out. It's when it's appropriate to do so, but this one is adding on to the intent of the buyer. Like I said before, the strategy portion of it. This has come in handy, I will tell you, in a pinch on a couple of instances where if we didn't have that in there, it could have gone either way, which is in F2, which is the closing, right? We will oftentimes put 30 days after acceptance. After that, it's 30 days after acceptance and to be delivered vacant. Again, this is with if the buyer's intent is to receive the property and it's supposed to be vacant. If it's a 1031 exchange or they're buying an occupied rental property, that's obviously not appropriate. Someone's still my mouth. Are you doing it? You're driving? Okay. Are you driving?
One other point, sorry, I see this one all the time. Don't put on or before, like
Yeah.
30 days after
And
acceptance.
here's why. I'll say that. Thank you for bringing that up. Like, because here's the thing with on or before is there are some markets, and Mike and I were kind of having, our legal nerd talk about what markets are you can do this with and you can't do this with or whatever. In our market, it adds confusion because on or before doesn't mean anything. On or before means that you still have to create an amendment to illustrate what that before even is. So don't put on or before because I've seen agents go to battle of, hey, we're going to close on the 30th, but no, it says before, and we're going to close on the 16th. Well, if you don't have an amendment for the 16th, it's moot, but it says before. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't mean anything. So just put on there the actual calendar day, which I don't recommend unless there's a specific reason for that, or put in a certain amount of days that you need to close and to be delivered vacant. In the face that you made, I'll want your opinion on it. But the reason why you don't want the calendar days is, and sometimes you do. Sometimes you're up against a certain deadline, whether it's a 1031 exchange or it's someone PCSing and they have a certain amount of time. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're going back and forth on a negotiation and you put a specific day in there and it takes you 5 days to get a fully executed contract, you just burn 5 days. But yet that closing date is still remaining. Do you have another point?
No, I thought you said you want to put a specific.
No, you want to avoid putting a specific date if at all possible.
Just the parameters, 45 days.
Far better to put that to 30 days from acceptance to be delivered vacant, 45 days from acceptance to be delivered vacant. That's far better. F3 is, this comes up so often now. Before completing, you want to make sure you check with the buyer's lender. And the reason why is because let's say that I've seen this happen before too. Someone will write an offer and it's a USDA loan closing in 30 days. And then there's like a 10 days for F3A. That's not possible. Like that's literally not possible. You should be checking with the buyer's lender to find out how many days you need. And don't get too fancy because someone's earnest money and their ability to close, you're jeopardizing. You're playing poker with someone else's money and property. And what I mean by that is if the lender says, listen, I'm going to need at least 60 days on this USDA loan to close. And you're like, I'm going to get tricky and I'm going to put 45 days to close with 15 days on F3 because I added together and it's 60 days. So what's the problem? That is a problem. Here's why. First of all, that's not guaranteed for one thing. Secondly, if the other side, so you're on the buy side, in this scenario, the other side, the listing side goes, we're going to use 1 day out of that 15 day. Now you're done. Now it's a 46 day closing and you have no extension left. That's also a strategy that I'll talk about in just a second too on the buy side, but that's how you can get burned on that in reverse. So know that it's a double-edged sword. Either party can use it. On the buy side though, I think maybe Russ and I have strategized about this before. We don't want to be tricky. Our job is to operate in good faith and cooperate well and professionally with the other side. But trust when I say that I wholeheartedly believe that KW agents know our contracts far more than the other agents outside, more because of Pache than anything else.
You know what they took out of the F3?
See, you see,
It's
he's on a different thing. You see,
because it used to state that either party could extend for reasons beyond their control. They took reasons beyond their control out.
yeah, it's unilateral now.
Yeah.
Unilateral, right?
So unilateral just means that one party, whoever is making that request to extend, now that extension becomes valid and part of the contract versus having to have both sides sign it. So let's just pause for a second. I want to strategize on this. So I think it was maybe Russ, but a few people. Our goal is to protect the goals and needs of our client, right? We have fiduciary responsibility to do that. So let's say hypothetically that you're representing a buyer, you've written and drafted this contract, it's a 30-day close, and you have a 10-day extension that's in F3, for instance. And let's say that you're told by the lender that you're working with, the buyer's lender, that, hey, we gotta close like on time because my lock is gonna expire. And rates have gone up, which, by the way, this is the environment that we're in right now. Rates have gone up by 0.5 point. If I have to extend, it's gonna cost the buyer $3,000. That's a pretty realistic example, right? That's happening right now. And you know that you can close, you're prepared to close. And then the seller's agent, I don't know who it was. If you're in here, let me know, because this is the actual thing. Seller's agent called and was like, you know what? We just realized it's kind of inconvenient to move out on that day. So we're probably gonna just take like 5 or 6 extra days. So just letting you know, we might extend 5 or 6 days. I'll get back to you and I'll let you know. Right, so knowing that 5 or 6 days or whatever that is puts your buyer in jeopardy, will cost your buyer an extra $3,000 to extend. What's the strategy? What do you do?
Trigger the 1 day.
Trigger the 1 day.
The exception to that being, you better make sure that the other side doesn't have their own standard addendum that modifies that.
Right.
Counselor, I'm getting there.
Sorry,
I'm setting up a dramatic pause. I object.
bad interruption.
No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, you burn 1 day. So in getting off of any other brokerage addenda that alters the contract, the way the contract is written, either side can use it and they burn the provision, whether they use 1 day of it or the entire amount of days that's in it. The caveat being that there are some firms, I think we have Better Homes and Garden, Locations,
Corcoran does.
and Cochrane, I believe, and always read them to check. They have the provision in there that if you use, like for instance, 1 day, in that example, you use 1 day and there's 10 days that are in there, you use 1 day, the seller still has 9 days remaining. So it doesn't mean that you can't use that strategy. You have to alter that strategy. In that case, you would then get all 10 and close sooner. You would burn all 10 and close sooner.
Or you just delete it from the addenda.
Or you
on the
delete
other
it. You can
side.
strike. You can strike a paragraph or strike wording or whatever it is.
Do you believe that that wording creates opportunity for agents or another way out? Or is it, and I guess what I'm not asking, can I speak down to, should we include that language in our standard addendum as well, or no?
No, I think it creates a problem. I think it creates a problem for one side or the other. Like on one side, you
There's
know,
conflicting language and
Yeah.
instruction too.
like I think on that case that you're talking about, I think we represented the buyer on that one, right? And the sellers are like adamant, oh no, we're extending because our movers are not, we're not done moving yet. And so they wouldn't provide, I think it was like $3,500, right? And so if you're doing that, you know, you're doing something to the other side that is not necessarily good and can get you into trouble.
Well, you don't, like I said, you don't want to do business in an unprofessional or unfair manner, but at the same time too, like that's the crux of it. If we were protecting our client and it's going to cost our, I mean, literally they may not be able to close on that transaction because this other agent's kind of willy-nilly, just like, yeah, we need an extra couple of days. Like, no, but I would tell you before you do those things, that's what the brokers are here for. Have a conversation with us because there's so much nuance in what's involved in that, right? So we want to.
At the shortest point, that's why you make contact with the agent in the beginning
Oh, yeah.
that you're doing business with, because you can have these discussions.
Yeah.
So that you say, hey, you know, Joe, this is what's happening on the buyer side. You know, how does that affect the seller if we do this?
Another thing too, again, just as a strategy that I've done before as well is, Tony, maybe you should earmuff this, but like if instead of using, like I've called and I said, hey, I might need an extension. And they're like, yeah, no problem at all. But I know that my deal is just kind of, I don't know why. I feel like every other deal for Rustin is like this, but I don't know if it's going to close because there's so much things that are happening. The lender's gotten this and I got to transfer cryptocurrency over here or whatever the thing is, right?
Jesus.
So I'll say to the other side, I'm like, hey, I need an extension. I'll send an extension, but what I'll typically do is I'll send an amendment to F2. So the conversation I had with them is, hey, I'm gonna use an extension. I think we have 10 days. I'm not sure yet. But here's my script. So I'm not misleading anyone. Hey, just to let you know, we might need to extend. I'm not sure yet. I'm still piecing everything together. F3, I think we're allowed an extra 10 days. I don't know if I need it or don't need it. Let me figure it out. I got to circle back with the buyer. I got to circle back with the lender, but I'll send you something a little later today. Okay, no problem. And in that case, I'll typically send them an amendment to F2, amending the closing date. And why would I do that?
So you can still use F3A.
I didn't burn the extension.
Yeah.
But it depends on who's on the other side. Like, again, I'm playing chess, so I don't know if the other guy's playing checkers or he's playing chess. The smart agent on the other side is gonna go, yeah, nice try, send me an extension. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake.
There was a broker that did that. They had extended 3 times on F2, and then they extended F3A, and there was nothing that we could do about it.
Because they did it, the right way. Okay. Oh, Carrie. Wait a minute. I know, that's not Carrie's fault, I just. F8, buyer side, if you're writing the contract, you'll want to select seller on both F8A and B. That's for the assessments. On the list side, if you know there's an assessment, you should be disclosing that. It depends on what it is. If it's a seller wanting to pay for it, they're trying to avoid paying for it, it should be obviously on the SRPDS regardless. If there's also a known assessment, you can put it on section Q. There's a couple of, that's happening now. By the way, when you'll notice when the market changes, you'll see a lot of weird things pop up. Increased assessments. This is part of like inflation and all these other kind of things. Associations that's going to start to creep up. So as you guys are closing, please be aware that you got to be looking at and encouraging the buyer to review their condo docs and financials.
And ask for updates too. If you're in a 45-day escrow period, ask for new documents, updated documents, because that's your right in the contract.
And so some of the things that you should be looking for in terms of that is the minutes are super important. If you guys don't know what minutes are, it's when the association or that board for that condo or community get together to have whatever they're discussing, because you're a fly on the wall to hear whatever the conversations are. So if the conversations for the last 6 or 7 months have been, boy, we got to replace this whole roof of this place. This thing is like, you're hearing that kind of conversation. So if there's no approved assessment or approved repair for that thing, but they've been discussing it for a year or two, what's coming down the pipe. That's you can hear it. Or we're voting on the assessment or whatever it is. Those are things that you should be kind of clued into.
Have they figured out the difference if assessment occurs and increase of the maintenance? It's instead of increasing the maintenance, you have it as the other cost.
We've determined, right, that remember that was that one issue that we've had before. Whether it's an assessment alone, whether they increase the association in a temporary assessment, it's one flat fee, whether there's an agent that will remain nameless.
Who used to be here?
Yeah, I know.
I'm trying to
So it happened actually on one of our.
Yeah, it happened twice.
Yeah.
So their position was, it's not an assessment, it was a loan. So it doesn't fall in this category. And I disagree with that. I think it says something in there. It's like a financial obligation.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why you write it in. If you know that there's an assessment for $5,000, just write it in, sell it or pay for it, in F8, which F8 or F7.
And also too, where it says on there, any exclusions, I always tell you guys put none. The reason why is they can't wiggle, that's less room for them to wiggle out of to go, oh no, this is a loan. No, it's not. It says none, exclusion's none. It doesn't say exclusion alone.
Those are pre-populated in your template, aren't they?
They're pre-populated in the template, yeah.
The exceptions.
Exceptions, yeah, sorry. If the buyer wishes to have more than one set of keys, you can write that in E2 or section Q. I know that's comes about usually with properties of FOBs when it's a costly FOB, so you can have those kind of things in there. H1 on the buyer side, make sure you enter the type of proof of funds, such as, this is my opinion on this, by the way, is we oftentimes say contrary things depending on who we're representing, the buyer or the seller. So if I'm representing the buyer and I'm submitting an offer, I don't want to, if it's a finance transaction, I don't want to submit an offer with the buyer's bank statements. And why is that? While it's sound, right? It looks good. They might have $1 million in the bank. If I'm negotiating back and forth, that doesn't necessarily help me when the seller sees. And I literally have had this. People get so emotional, which is why we have jobs, which is why we represent people as a real estate agent in a transaction, is because we're supposed to be removing the emotion from the negotiation. I've seen it where sellers have seen the bank statements. It has nothing to do with anything. And they're like, we're not going to lower the price. You see how much money he has in the bank? I'm like, that has nothing to do with the transaction at all. So if you're negotiating, which when you send this in, you're not done negotiating until the transaction closes. So this is due, the proof of funds might be due in 3 or 4 days after you have an accepted offer, but why are you still negotiating? Well, there's still J1. Appraisal hasn't come in yet. There are other reasons as to why this can show up. So the proof of funds from the buyer's lender is adequate information that you can provide to the seller without showing your cards. Like, think of it as playing poker. I'm not showing my cards. So what if you have it all cash? Yeah, Russ.
Typically on the pre-approval letters from your buyer's lender,
Yeah.
it should state that lender has verified buyers.
Right. And typically that's satisfactory to most listing agents. Now I'm gonna change hats now and go from buyer's agent to listing agent. It depends on the circumstance. So let's say, I mean, I'm not saying to be difficult and over scrutinize every offer that comes in and go, no, I'm not gonna accept it with the lender's proof of funds letter. Instead, I want to buy. It depends on the circumstance. But like, for instance, what if you had, and I'm sure a lot of the top producing agents have, what if you had a listing that's like, man, this has fallen out of escrow twice already. My seller is really irritated with me, but it's kind of the property, right? Maybe it's overpriced a little bit. Maybe it's nuanced. Maybe it's the biggest or best property in the neighborhood, which you never want, especially in a shifting market. There's these little things as to why people are falling out. So instead, you get an offer. This is the third time around. You might counter back and go, yes, I can see that you have the proof of funds, but I need to see. Or let's say that they have an appraisal clause built into that. If they have an appraisal clause built into that and they put down 20,000 earnest money or initial deposit, and they have an appraisal clause of 100,000, guess what? I absolutely want to see the bank statements. I absolutely want to make sure that they have the money. They're not just saying that they have the money. Because, being on the buy side, I'm sure that you guys have had lenders that are like, oh, he's fine. It'll come in. I've looked at the comps, so it's fine. I'm like, but do they have the money in there? Yeah, it'll come in. Like, you're answering a question I'm not asking. Like, it's a different thing. So it depends on what side you're on and what the reason is. But in some cases on the buy side, you might want to have proof of funds. On the list side, you might want to ask for the bank statements. So there's another option on there too, which is, what is it? Proof of funds letter. So what is a proof of funds letter? No, that's not it. What's the other one? Depository?
Verification depository financial institution.
So what is that? That's a letter from like the teller. Like, and it depends on who the institution is, what the bank is. Some of them, Carrie, you worked at a bank for years, right? So some of them will print it out and it'll just have your actual balance and the account number, which it defeats the purpose because that's just giving the bank statement. It's just 1 page versus 15 pages and they can see how many times you went to McDonald's and Taco Bell. Or other ones will just say, they have adequate funds, whatever that is. Did you went to Taco Bell? We're not going to call them.
Probably cost your client about $10.
Yeah. And what did I skip one? Hold on. Is this important? H1, H2. What is H1, H2?
That's contingent on obtaining cash funds is H1.
A little practice tip, always, if you don't have a transaction coordinator, be super vigilant about your dates. We had a client recently who terminated a seemingly great contract because the buyer's agent didn't provide the CLA, the letter right before closing that everything was basically done. Even though it was done, the documents were at the title company. They didn't take that step to physically provide us with a copy of that. Our seller terminated the transaction, even though they got above asking. It didn't make sense, but they still terminated it. So we always want to make sure, even though we think everything's done, docs are at title, we're good to go, we can put our feet up. Make sure that that last step, that CLA gets delivered, because it's right in the paragraph that if it's not, the seller can automatically terminate. And that's a breach, and we can't do anything about it. And so,
Unless you extend your F3.
but even then, you can still breach it, because you're right, that would pack the days. But if we gave them notice before they gave the F3, which is what happened here, they couldn't do anything about it. It's all about who fired the bullet first. And we fired it before they could use F3A. Thus, it was a valid termination. And the buyer's agent probably got an earful for not just submitting the CLA. So just little things easily overlooked, but it could be a huge thing that makes us look bad.
Well, does that mean that then it was already past the date of the CLA?
It was on, they waited for like the clock to strike midnight, really, and then they issued the termination.
They didn't exercise the extension.
Correct. No, it was after. They didn't.
Wait, but the seller has the right to cancel.
Right, that's what I'm saying. The seller has the built-in right if they don't get that letter, and they did, even though the buyer was ready to close a few days later.
Right.
And so it's easily overlooked if we think, oh, it's just waiting for them to get escrow. But our client, our seller decided to terminate the transaction.
Tony, what I was saying is that to alleviate that is to exercise your F3, right? Unilateral right to extend, assuming that your CLA, your close date, and everything should be, is attached to the scheduled close date. So by exercising your F3, you pull out the close date, which gives you then time to satisfy the CLA. If you're not going to get it in time, then the buyer should elect to cancel, because under your H3 contingency of the contract, if you don't have your CLA, or if you can't satisfy the conditions prior to the date, at that particular point in time, you can cancel. As a buyer, you can cancel full blown first, so you're not in default.
Well, the only time an F3A would affect it is if it was said to be such days prior to closing, rather than such days after acceptance. Because if it's prior to closing, then that'll tap the F3 extension. If it's after acceptance, you're screwed.
It should always be tied.
It should be.
That's how we write.
But I've seen them written both ways.
Yeah,
So I'm going down the rabbit hole here. I just wanted to make sure that people knew, always be vigilant about those little tiny minutia.
So on H1, H2, one is contingency of obtaining cash funds versus not. It says on the contract, select H1 or select H2. There are exceptions on where very small exceptions as to when you might use both. What would be one of those exceptions as an example?
Like a hard money loan?
Well, it could be like if some of your partial down payment is tied to something. So you might have funds to verify now that's available, but the other set of funds might be tied to something, whether it's a HELOC or a home sale or whatever it is, right? So and that adds a layer of protection for the buyer by having that contingency built in. So while you want to, so one shows the strength of the offer, like, hey, we have $300,000 down. We have 100,000 now, but 200 is going to come from this thing. The 100 now shows the strength of offer that you can verify and show them right now. The 200 is tied to something else.
Wouldn't it be conflicting though in that case? Because if you check H2, that there's a contingency that would apply to funds coming in, even if you already have a portion of it, because with the caveat that with H2 contingency, you would already supply your verification of cash flow, saying, hey, here's the 100 we have. The contingency is on the remainder 200 years out.
Yeah, so we're trying to get an acceptance, but it allows the buyer to cancel if they can't, whatever the other thing is tied to, it allows them to get out of that thing. Let's say that it's tied to a home that's trying to be sold in Alaska, but the sun came out and the igloo melted, and now you can't sell that home. It allows them the ability to cancel, right?
Well, if there's a partial contingency, you should always check H2, right?
If there's what?
Even if there's just a partial contingency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always check
Yeah.
H2.
Yeah, for sure.
but I don't think hard money is a case for H2.
Yeah, I saw that written the other day and I was kind of curious because I wasn't sure that it was correctly in the right box. But it should just be, I mean, it's still a loan, but it's effectively no appraisal.
Well, because a lot of times they write in the contract that it's cash.
Mhm.
And then I'll see in Q1, buyer reserves the right to use hard money lending. And I was never comfortable with that. But, if the seller's okay with it, then
So should that be an H2 or H3?
it should be in Q, right?
Q and H2, because it's not necessarily in their hand.
Right.
It's different. Would be subject to it.
And by the way, speaking of hard money, in this market that we're shifting into, working with investors, you guys will see a lot of investors that are like, write it as cash, but it's hard money. You guys got to be super careful about that, because that's disingenuous on how you're writing the offer. What I always, and if the buyer, and you have to educate, you have to have a conversation with your buyer, you have to document that you've explained to the buyer what the parameters are, what the protections are, and so forth. And what I always do for the agents that I broker for is I put in there, like he said, section Q is the buyer has the right to utilize private money or portfolio loans or whatever, blah, 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 blah. So it leaves that line in there so that if you do change it to some sort of financing, some of those things still apply. But you got to just be careful, because investors will come out of the woodwork when the market shifts and prices start to normalize. They're going to try to jump on it. And see.
Yeah, I mean, I would use H2 if I was representing a buyer with hard money. Because if you're doing a special term and it says buyer reserves the right, and then if he doesn't get the hard money and he was dependent on it, that's when you lose your deposit, right? Because you said it's cash, you said you may use it, but you didn't get the
There's
loan,
no strings, yeah.
there's no string, right?
So I-1B, on the buy side, you're gonna want this date to be as short as possible. Ideally, like when I send corrections back out to you guys, I'm typically telling you to put like 2 or 3 days in there. That's for the date that the buyer, or amount of days after acceptance that the buyer should receive the SRPDS. And there's a reason for that. So my thought process is this, is a lot of times people don't think about these kind of things. And no, I've seen things on there like 10 days plus, which to me is crazy. Because I'll see 7 days for J1 and 10 days for SRPDS. My thought process, whether it works out this way in practice or not, my thought process is if I put it on there for 2 days and I get the SRPDS back, it gives me an opportunity to look at the SRPDS, ask questions, make some notes, and then give this SRPDS to the home inspector to say, can you pay special attention to this roof because there was a leak last year, and can you pay special attention? I'm giving him kind of the blueprint of what to look for, to look out for my client. So that's ideally why you want to do that. Jenny.
Yes, I recently have 2 contract have some problem with their disclosure. One is after we closed, the buyer find out there's some poison plant around the neighborhood from the neighbor, on the property. So that plant, like after we did some research, it's like poison. So my buyer were really mad, like why seller did not disclose it, because according to their landscaper said it's more poison than the poison ivy. So totally scared them. Then the seller side said to the seller, it's just a plant. We cannot disclose everything like it's poison on the property. However, that one is like would potentially cause people blind. So anyway, we're trying to negotiate to have seller to pay some money to remove the plant. We still haven't get the money from them. So the seller side, they were like really mad. We even request that. So she told me the mango sap is poison. The Primaria flower is poison. He said it's ridiculous. Your buyer asked a seller to disclose everything. So I don't know if anyone have any experience about the poison plant. Is that count the material fact?
I was going to say yes until you said what kind of plants they were, and then I was going to say that sounds delicious, but
But mangoes are from the poison ivy family.
are they poisonous?
Well, I mean, I'm allergic to poison ivy. So if I
We're all
touch mango sap, I get a rash, right? But it comes down to, would the buyer have purchased the property if they knew the plants were poison, right? And so if they would have still bought it, then it's not really a material fact. But if they would have said no, or they would have asked for a credit, then it becomes a material fact where the seller should have to disclose it if they knew.
At least in the disclosure, then the buyers, if they want, they have the right to cancel it.
Right. So, and in Jenny, so an I-2 is the amended disclosure. So if that wasn't mentioned in I-1B, then on the amended disclosure, you can ask the seller to redisclose that material fact, or the buyer can state that they've discovered this thing, whatever that thing is, and they now have the right to cancel. They have the right to do that in an amended disclosure.
We're already closed.
Very close.
Yeah. We find that after close, the second day buyer moved in, the neighbor come to talk to them because the neighbor said the seller never like really taking care of us. It's overgrown on their side. So every time when she trying to trim, the sap got her hand or skin, it got burned. And she also told buyer the landscaper was potentially like got blind for a day because of taking care of that plant. So my buyer assumed they knew it's poison. That's why.
So here's the short answer, is anything that if the new owner, the buyer, who's now the owner, if they feel that something wasn't disclosed, that becomes a civil matter. If it's already closed, that's a potentially non-disclosure issue that they would have to take up with the seller. Is it something that they would win or something that's obvious? That's up to a court to decide and spend a ton of money even getting to that point, but they would have to, they'd have to talk to an attorney and make a claim civilly against the seller. How long has it been?
We closed last month in May. So however, when we talked to the seller's agent, they agreed to pay half of the removal fee. Then now we're sending the agreement to them. They're just not replying us. So the seller's agent become like not cooperative. So we sent to the seller, they did not reply. But in the emails, she literally said the seller agrees to pay half, which is how much. So I don't know what to do right now. I keep calling the seller's agent, but they're not replying because since the house is already closed.
Yeah. That's gotta be,
Lawsuit.
that's a civil matter. So that's a lawsuit between the buyer. And so I can call you afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have another question also about those disclosure things, because I have another one in the escrow. We find out the seller did not disclose they have some special assessment. We find out from the lender disclosure. So however, it's not like really important to my buyer to have them pay because it's gonna only have 6 months to pay. And every month it's almost $200 more. But according to the which is that one? E4. Oh, not E4. The one said if there's the assessment.
Yeah, FA.
Yes, FA. So they have to pay it, right? The seller.
Depends on how you wrote it. So if you wrote it that the seller is responsible for it, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, we always check seller. So even buyer does
Are
not.
you still in escrow on this one?
Yes, still in the escrow.
Just don't assume that they're gonna pay it. Just check with the seller's agent.
Okay.
Just remind them that, hey, your guys agreed to pay for the remainder of the assessment, so.
But get a demand of what that total assessment is as well. Don't take like a verbal conversation as to what it is. Have escrow get that demand from the association.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So the other thing is, I-1B should be as low as possible. I-2 should be as low as possible as well. That should be like 1 or 2 days. And the reason for the amended one is if something new occurs, whether you discover it on the buy side or whether the seller finds out about it, you want to know as soon as possible. That this is a kind of a good segue to it is, what if you represent the buyer and you have 10 days in there for the amended disclosure and there's a water leak? That means that they don't have to tell you about it or disclose it to you. And if you're closing in 5 days, that's a problem. You want to know as soon as possible. Now, flip that around and you're on the list side. I want it longer. On the list side, unless I've done the SRPDS ahead of time, which for my listings, I would absolutely already have that done before even going on the MLS. But you want to have as much out or time frame as possible. So on I-B, or I-2, if you represent the seller, I'd probably want that 10 days if I can. I want to extend that out. And an example of that would be, this is a real example, is I had that at 10 days. I had a property that I had listed where the AC went out. So if I had it at 1 day or 2 day for the amended disclosure, I'd have to tell them right away. They were already a little gun shy. It was a first time home buyer anyways, but I fixed it. I had the whole thing remedied by a licensed AC person. And I redisclosed it in a time frame and said, here's an issue, AC went out. Don't worry, already had a guy who went out. Here's a receipt. Okay, thank you. It was already solved. I gave them the problem and the solution immediately at the same time. So you got to know which one to use and when.
If a seller does not fill it out.
Ooh, I don't like where this is going.
They become in default of funds. What happens at that point?
The seller has to. It's by statute. So when you're having your listing consultation, is that what we're talking about? Like,
Yeah, so let's say it's at 2 days and that goes by and they don't fill it out.
oh, I see what you're saying.
Then what?
If you represent the seller,
Buyer.
you represent the buyer. There's I forgot what it is. It's
I-4.
I-4. The buyer is, if he knows about it, he can amend the disclosure, but really for the purpose of making it, to terminate.
Yeah. But don't wait for, you just say, the buyer discovers something, don't wait for the seller to disclose it because then your buyer's just burnt through his 15 days or 10 days or whatever it is.
So we talked about this, right? I2 is the buy side, how you want to frame that. I3A pertains to the receipt of the SRPDS. So a lot of people freak out about this. Receipt doesn't mean that you've acknowledged, signed off, approved anything. It's just you're acknowledging receipt of it. So that can be 1 day for that matter, just, you know, whatever is reasonable. I3B pertains to the time frame to examine. That's super important on the buy side. I3C pertains to the time to examine the amended SRPDS. So one of them is to amend or examine the original, and then the other is to examine the amended. He mentioned this. I3 is seller driven, I4 is buyer driven. So it's upon discovery. General disclosures, lead-based paint, so forth, is for all properties 1978 or earlier. Failure to do so is an EPA fine of $10,000 per incident. So if you miss initials and signatures and what have you, that's all that adds up per incident. So super important to make sure that you include those kind of disclosures. What I oftentimes recommend to people, which a lot of you guys do now, is if you have a property that you're submitting an offer for that falls within the lead-based paint, print the EPA brochure and have the client sign it along with the purchase contract. So that is, you know, proof that you've disclosed all the EPA regulations to them.
Does that contain under the SIP forms, or where can we get copies?
No, you gotta go online.
I can put it in zip forms though.
Give me one.
I can put it in there automatically and then you guys can delete it if it's not applicable. But I can put it in there as a template under the templates. If the property is older, so again, this is kind of a strategy. J1, I see a lot of people, your team will use a short J1. I don't have a problem with that because you guys get it done. But as newer agents, like don't put 5 days or 7 days for J1. You got to know like what the property is. If the property is built in 1940 and you're putting 5 days in there, that's not enough time to like do a sewer scope if need be, or a roof, or there's too many things that could go wrong, right?
Well, it's not only the time frame for getting the inspection done, but it's giving your buyer
Right.
adequate time to like make a decision.
Right, because
Let's negotiate.
Right.
plus there's for new agents that might be listening who haven't had a transaction or enough of them, is when you do a home inspection, ideally you're going to want to have that home inspector go out like day 1 or day 2. Like you should be making that phone call. Hey, I think I might have an accepted offer. What's your time frame? Can I book you for Tuesday or whatever the thing is? If you want to kind of tee that up, have them go out there in a day or 2, because you're going to get, it's going to be another 24, maybe 40 hours for you to get the report back. You're already in 5 days, 4 or 5 days. That you need enough time to look at it, but you may need enough time to call a specialist to come out to get you an estimate or a quote. Because if the home inspector goes, yeah, listen, the roof's about to cave in, the panel's about to catch on fire, the place is about to flood, you got to call all these different people to get a quote, because he's not going to want to sign off on that until you have some estimates. Russ?
And if there's a delay on scheduling your J1, already request for the extension up front.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Seller, can't get a home inspector out there in the amount of time, we have a couple more days or whatever it is.
You bring up a great point, is you don't wait till the 11th hour for these kind of things. Like, do not wait till the 11th hour. If your J1 expires today, it expires at midnight today. Once the clock turns midnight, your ability to cancel as a result of using J1 as a reason is gone. So if you know that that's coming short and you need more time, you should be already asking for an extension on J1. The other thing is there are other brokerages, I forgot who, but there's another brokerage or two that has it in their standard addendum that they add extra time to the J1 expiration.
If they don't,
Negotiations go out.
yeah.
So in other words, if it expires today and I send out and I'm the buy side, I send out a request, it buys me like a certain amount of time for them to respond back as whatever, so just read it, make sure you read it.
And you know, with J1 now, with the market shifting, like Ashar said, you guys are not getting as many offers. You're not seeing as many offers. And so sellers not going to be so apt to cancel and not give you an extension. So the days of like a 5-day or a 7-day J1, those are going to be gone if they're not gone already.
It really should be at least 8 to 10 days.
Yeah, if it's a condo, not a problem. But if you got a big house,
And sometimes an old house.
Yeah.
If it's an old house, you got to have time. Chronologically, you guys have gotten a lot better at this. J3, which is closing final walkthrough, J8 and J9 should be done chronologically. I see this happen a lot with other brokerage firms, and it's not wrong, but it's not right either, you know? So if all of them said 5 days, 5 days, 5 days, actually what we used to see back in the day is like 2 or 3 days. J3, 2 days, J8, 2 days, J9, 2 days. Well, what's the problem with that? Number one is J3, which is final walkthrough, doesn't give you enough time to do a final walkthrough, but the purpose of the final walkthrough is to make sure that nothing new happened detrimentally to the property since the last time you inspected it, which is J1. I had this example happen to me in one of my, when I represented a buyer, we did the final walkthrough, went in, the property was immaculate, clean, perfect. We did the final walkthrough. The seller turned off the power because they were cheap. They're not supposed to do that, by the way, but they turned the power off, which caused the ice maker to melt, which caused the water to leak out of the ice maker onto laminate floors, which created a warp in the wood floors of about 2 feet by 2 feet. It's not huge on laminate floors that was discontinued 11 years ago, which meant that the entire floors needed to be replaced. And that was to the tune of $25,000. So had it been 2 days before, that's not enough time to like, everyone stop, I got to renegotiate, don't fund the loan, don't close it. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to happen. You do not have the right to cancel the contract by J3. You have the right to withhold with the provisions provided in J4. So you need enough time to examine, to get invoices, to have a negotiation, to have a conversation and so forth. So our firm standard is J3, which is final walkthrough, needs to be 5 days at minimum. You can have it more, you can have it longer, but at minimum, it has to be 5 days. That's the brilliance of Pache.
You can cancel though.
But
You can cancel.
there's a series, yeah, but you're going to confuse it. You can cancel it, but it's going to be a series of linking it to like I2 and all that other stuff. So with the amount of time that Tony put together that he thought was appropriate, which I agree with, is having 5 days. What if it falls on a holiday? What if you're at, Friday night that oh my God, because I see this happen all the time. You're supposed to close on Monday. You're like, yeah, at 6 o'clock PM, I'm going to do the final walkthrough. I'm like, what?
Yeah, because stuff is already at the bureau.
Like escrow is closed already.
Yeah.
You're not, if you need to stop that train, good luck. That's not happening. So 5 days helps you get there. And then chronologically, J8, which is removal of items. I see people go 5 days, are you telling me that they're going to remove the items, clean carpets and the whole thing, and you're going to do a final walkthrough on the same day? And people always go, no, that's not what I mean. That's just the minimum. Well, listen, transaction coordinators, transaction managers live in the contract on the timeline. So if you put 5 days, 5 days, 5 days, guess what? They're doing exactly that. And that's exactly what will happen when you call and go, hey, I need to do the final walkthrough. Like, stuff is still in there. We're still trying to get stuff out. That's why. So do yourself a favor and set it up chronologically.
And don't make J3 or J8 NA.
Oh, never make the final walkthrough NA. That's crazy.
Or even removal of items.
Don't ever do that.
Well, unless it's rental, right? J8.
Well, I mean, look, you could have a vacant property and you remove J8 and then some homeless guy goes in there and trashes the place and you've removed it. Like he's left all his stuff behind and you're gonna have to move it and represent the buyer
What he's saying
because you
is,
left
like,
it out.
he's putting provisions in there to kind of, if you need to jump in and go, listen, we asked for this, because you can walk away from that provision, but you're not allowing them to.
Would the only time you would delete J8 is if there's an existing tenant that you're keeping?
If there's an
Yes.
existing tenant that's in there and you're acquiring the property tenant occupied, then it's totally fine.
But when you're in competing offers, people will not do a J1, they will not do a survey, they will not do termite, they will not do a J3, a J8, a J9, J10, they delete all that stuff.
I know, yeah, the cleaning, I get it. I mean, that's detrimental.
By the way, too, J4, as you can see right there, it should always be checked by closing date, not so many days after. After it closes, you're kind of on your own.
Have you ever seen in these cases where the property had or needed repair, buyer initiated J4? Is it unilateral or is it agreed to?
That's the thing. It's still agreed to. Yeah. That's what I mean. Like you got to understand that. Thank you for pointing it out, by the way. But that's not our rule. That's the contract, and that's escrow, and that's the market that we're in. But what we're trying to do is empower you guys to understand what the game is so you can play within the rules of the game. Not cheat anyone out of it, but like understand what the chessboard looks like and how all the pieces can move around.
And if they don't do the repair, then you have the right to get an estimate and have escrow withhold 150%.
But here's the thing, let's say that they don't sign off, because let's say you do a withholding and then the other side doesn't agree to the withholding and you have a whole fight. Here's the good news. The good news is if ever you decide or the buyer ends up suing the seller, trust me when I say that in all likelihood, the seller will lose because you operated and lived within the four corners of the contract, whereas they didn't. Even though they're kind of, saying, oh, we have the right not to agree to that or whatever, that's fine. But you live within the contract. You mentioned this on J3, your rights to do 150% withholding in J4. And they disagreed with that and, all these other kind of things, and they cost you money, potential damages and all this other kind of thing.
But the position on that though is they've already agreed to it.
Right.
Which is why the buyer has the case that they're probably gonna win.
But I know that the buyer and seller could walk at any time for no reason,
And entire property, this is J8 for cleaning, entire property checked or not have it checked. This hasn't been tested yet. I don't like that statement at all. Entire property means entire property. It means the driveway, the
sidewalks,
side,
the
yeah,
eaves.
it's a little dicey. So if you're on the list side, uncheck that thing. Like counter that out if you're on the list side. Because I have seen, before where buyers will try to push a certain thing or negotiate based on that. And if on the buy side, you represent the buyer and they expect to have the driveways like power washed or whatever it is, don't click that and be tricky. Just click that, but also put it in queue so that you can say, buyer, seller shall do this, that, clean the gutters, whatever it is. K1 should not be used at all on Oahu, at least. That's for staking only. K2, which is surveyed, is not necessary for condos or townhomes unless it's like a detached or CPR and you want to know where the overall boundary lines are. But generally speaking, it's not. It's for single family. If you're accepting, do I have it in here? I don't, but in our clauses, which I've already written for you guys, there's a clause in there for accepting an existing survey. And believe it or not, that clause for accepting an existing survey is probably stronger than getting a new survey. In the liability that the seller puts themselves in, not in terms of the most updated information, right? So if you're making an offer and the seller says, I want you to accept this property or accept the existing survey, don't just say yes, because I've seen this before, like buyer accepts Q2 or K2. Like that's the wrong thing to say. What it should say is seller shall provide buyer with existing survey dated X, whatever X is, within 3 days of acceptance. The buyer shall then have X amount of days to examine it, continue forward or terminate using provision 02 of the purchase contract. And seller shall, update SRPDS to state there's no modifications, erections, destructions of any walls, fences, or whatever it is on the property line. That actually, because now the SRPDS is a legal document that's required by statute. So if the seller lied on that, that becomes a different issue altogether. And that carries with it a 24-month statute of limitations. It's a different thing. So it makes them more liable for that. Yeah.
To be clear on the disclosure, does the form have to be used or can the seller use any other medium for disclosing their information? So it's required by statute, but they don't have to use this form.
I don't think it addresses the SRPDS document. I don't think that that's a great question. I don't think that the contract or the SRPDS tells you what you have to do in terms of what the update is. So I've seen updates. I always request them to either write it or print it out on an amendment. The amendments that we use for the purchase contract, it's not for the purchase contract. It's for whatever part of the contract that we want it to. There's a line in there that you can put in there. So it should be amendment to the SRPDS or whatever it is the right way to do it, where they can write it on the last page and put the date and write it on the last page of the SRPDS. But I've seen it come across on an email or whatever. It's just, you want it more official. I would push for if I'm on the buy side, but it doesn't have to be on a specific document. I'm not aware that it does. Are you?
No.
There's just usually certain information that has to be included.
Yeah, of whatever the amendment is.
But you have to sign an initial.
Yeah, but all those meetings except for the emails, you could do.
I asked because it came up, but FSBO didn't want to use the form that I gave them from.
And that's the challenge with dealing with laymen or non-licensees. And the way to handle it, which you probably did, is just say, this is not a request or a favor, it's a statute. You have to disclose. There's a very few number of exemption as to why someone wouldn't have to complete an SRPS, and that's not one of them. So in L2, you can write in, for section Q, you can write in who the buyer might select for TIR. That's something that I do because it saves time. If you already know who you're going to give the business to, if it's ABC Pest Control or whatever, you can write Q1. Buyer selects ABC Pest Control to satisfy L2. That's one less thing that you're going to have to deal with later. And that's one less thing that your transaction coordinator is going to have to deal with as well. M1, I see this happen often. M1, if you notice on M1, there's no box in there that allows you to put an X or an NA. And the reason is because the writers of this document didn't intend for you to remove M1. It's supposed to be in there. So never remove it, even if there's no, if it's not an association as far as you're aware, just leave it in there. M2, pretty simple. What I would recommend is use electronically formatted documents via email and internet address. Don't use once in a while, I forgot what association it is in Eva Beach. One of them is like, they only do, like, you got to pick it up. It's 300 pages. Like, you got to, because the reason, if you select it, you got to return it if it doesn't close. Yeah, it's a small, I don't think it's but maybe. But you want to try to pick the easiest one for in case it cancels, like you have to do less stuff.
Blue stuff, some stuff.
Cold Stone.
That sounds delicious, right?
I said Old Stone, not Cold
Oh,
Stone.
I think it's cold stuff. If you represent the seller who's trying to decide whether to sell or rent, here's a great tip. If you're dealing with, let's say that you sell someone a property and they're in the military, right? And now they're coming up on PCSing out. One easy way to have a logical conversation is because I'm not saying to, by the way, this is not a tactic to have someone, to force someone to do one thing or another, but it's a conversation. It's a conversation to have with someone so that they can realistically understand what they're dealing with, which is a lot of first-time home buyers, especially military, are like, yeah, I'm just gonna rent it out. Well, number one is, what's the rent going for? Because oftentimes they'll be surprised to see that they might be upside down in the mortgage versus the rent, or not what they're making. I think people kind of think like, oh, I bought the home and my mortgage payment is $4,000. I can charge like $8,000 for rent, right? No, not really. But the other thing too is you got to let them know how HARPTA might impact them if they decide to convert their primary residence or owner occupied into a rental property. So what you're doing is you're just kind of giving them a snapshot into the future to say, hey, HARPTA, I keep forgetting, this is 8.25. Is that what it is right now?
7.25, I think.
7.25. Assuming that it's 7.25, it's not 7.25% of the proceeds. It's 7.25% of the sale amount. That's huge. That makes it the largest fee that shows up on the escrow document. What'd you say? It's huge, and it's not a fee; it's a withholding, right? So you guys got to understand what that is, but it's applicable to anyone that's an out-of-state, non-Hawaii resident that's using their property as an investment property. So again, if you're sitting down and they're saying, yeah, we're going to be PCSing to Georgia, what are my options? Okay, here's what rent is going for. Here's what your mortgage payment is. And also, by the way, here's your net proceeds if you decided to sell it a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, because HARPTA is applicable. So here's what that fee looks like, at least in today's price point, versus here's what it would be not if there's no HARPTA, because we're selling it right now. So it's a good conversation to have. Yeah, Russ.
You may want to underline that they have escrow put it together.
Oh yeah. Yeah, have escrow. Don't do the math yourself. Call your escrow officer, let them put all that stuff together.
It's not going to be.
Depends on.
Is there any exemption like capital gains where if you bought like 2 out of the last 5, you could possibly get a waiver?
Not for this.
Not as a perk.
So here's what I have done with this, and some of you may know it, may not, may have used it or not. HARPTA, the HARPTA is a set amount of withholding because they're assuming the worst case scenario. And they're assuming the worst case scenario because the state of Hawaii, the Department of Taxation, doesn't want to go find someone who doesn't live in Hawaii, or FERPTA, by the way, is for foreign investor. They want to go find them when they left the state. That's the whole purpose of that withholding. It's not a fee, it's a withholding. They'll take as much as it possibly would likely be for capital gains for the state. And then you file, and then you got to get a return. Well, the state of Hawaii is very quick about taking your money. They're very slow at giving it back. I have a lot of clients that have been waiting 2 or 3 years to get the refund on their HARPTA withholding. Now, there's the caveat to that. That for whatever reason, a lot of people don't realize there is a waiver. You can't get the waiver until you're already in escrow. So you can't like plan for it ahead of time. I don't know why that is, but that there is a thing. So if you're dealing with a seller who wants to sell, they think they might be subject to HARPTA, but you don't want to have the full 7.25% withholding. We had one where the seller per escrow, per that 7.25% was like a $55,000 withholding. It's huge. It put them upside down. Like they wouldn't have been able to even sell the property. It exceeded the proceeds. But they went to their accountant filled out a form, applied for the waiver, sent the waiver into the Hawaii State Department of Taxation, who sent back the form, who then we sent it to the escrow officer. It's this is the process, which takes about 10 to 14 days. And it reduced that $55,000 HARPTA withholding to $3,000 penalty. Totally different scenario. And then they got cash back and we were able to close and it was totally fine. So you can do that, but like we talked about before, is you got to get ahead of these things and know these things ahead of time and not plan too late. Otherwise, you're gonna.
That works for short sales too. You gotta apply that for that short sale.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, because I just closed on a transaction where I represented the buyer and the seller had lived in the house for 4 years, but was not a resident of the state of Hawaii. And so he had to get the exemption and pay whatever tax was owed. So just because I live in the house doesn't mean I get that I'm not subject to the HARPTA.
And I'll just say about that is sometimes in that scenario, they might not be subject to it, but that's not our call and that's not escrow's call. That's something that they have to work out with their accountant and the Department of Taxation on whether that waiver goes through or not. That's like not our thing. That's their thing to figure out.
So you're saying there's a difference between owner occupied.
Well,
Because it's a non-resident.
because Mike said, what if you live there in 2 out of the last 5 years? And I'm saying, well, yeah, that applies if you're a resident in Hawaii, right? But these people were military stationed here, but they never left. They never gave up their residency in Tennessee.
So let me, can I just chime in for 1 second too? This is where the confusing part comes
You're
in.
on a second already.
Is if you fill out the form if you fill out the form as how it's written, every single military person would be subject to HARPTA because of how it's written. So it's like one of those things where it's like, we don't want to tell them how to complete it and fill it out. But in practice, is most military subject to HARPTA? Probably not in practice. But they got to talk to, we got to send them over to their.
So they got multiple properties. And so we gotta make sure with them, like, is this gonna be your primary now, or are you gonna keep the other one as your primary?
But what he's saying is per HARPTA, not per us, per HARPTA,
For HARPTA.
are they a resident of Hawaii? It's not an occupancy. It's not solely an
So
occupancy
they
issue.
switch to residency is what we have to ask them.
Well, sometimes you have the U.S. Sailor Debt Relief Act, which also can be introduced into there.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, just because they occupy doesn't mean they're not gonna not be subject to HARPTA if their residency is some other place on the mainland, right?
Well, and this is where it helps to get ahead of it, I mean, to establish domicile usually takes 6 months, and you just have to establish an intent to be moving here. So maybe they want to do an absentee ballot in Tennessee, but you have to let them know, hey, look, if you do that, it's going to cost you 50 grand in 2 years when you go to sell.
Yeah, but that's also means like you give up your residency someplace else, you're paying income tax here as well, right? So.
Lastly, on section Q, or 2 things. Section Q, these are kind of commonly used special terms. Please, guys, don't get creative and write your own terms because that can be construed as practicing law without a license. We already have it written for you. Just use the ones that we already have. It's in the templates and clauses. It comes up often. And then lastly, and I'll take any questions if there are any, but on the bottom there, I still get people asking me to sign the bottom. The bottom is that little box there on the bottom of page 14 or on the bottom of page 2 on the counter is for rejections only. It literally, if you look up the law, I know a lot of other brokerage firms will go, oh, we use it for acceptance. That's great. They can use it for however they want. We can make a policy that we have to write a heart sign and a smiley face on all of our contracts too. That's fine. But we use that provision as how the spirit of the law was written, which is for rejections only. So If it's rejected, send it over. Make sure if it is rejection, mark it appropriately. That's on T3 where it says notice of rejection, or on the page 2 of the counter. So that's it. Anyone have any questions online?
To your
At
last
home.
point, 1699 3J says only if the seller refuses to sign to acknowledge the rejection does the broker then sign. It's not just an automatic rejection. It's only if the client won't sign it that we have to acknowledge it. The
Right,
other party.
right.
Okay. I'm trying to read questions here. God, I hate this mouse. Oh, okay. Any questions for you guys?
Initials and dates. On section T, we don't really date it, but they should date it to the left of the.
Always.
T2.
I always have my clients initial and date it.
So you don't just, if you're a seller, you don't just check it, put a checkbox, you have to put an initial box
Yep.
in the T1, T2,
Mhm.
then.
Yep.
dates next to it.
Because, you know, there are some unscrupulous agents, I won't name any,
Not here,
some that have been with us
not anymore.
that will revise contracts after the fact.
Those who shut up.
They gone.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Guys, thank you for, listen, we're going to try to do all of our classes back in person. I'd rather see your lovely faces
Yeah.
and Jordan without socks on as frequently as I possibly can. We'll feed you. We're going to give you prizes for everyone who showed up in person. Everyone gets a BMW paid for by Rustin and a cash prize. So thank you guys on Zoom. Thank you guys for showing up in person. We greatly appreciate it, and have a good rest of your day.